Coming at you hot with another round of Patreon Q&A. Why do I sound drunk? Coming at your house, another round Patreon Q&A. Who said that? Number one, I'm jumping into it. Why are taxes? Question mark, question mark. The easiest answer is punishment for your naughty behavior. Did you think about that? Realistically, to pay for any number of things that may or may not be relevant, but primarily for punishment for your naughty behavior. Maybe for my naughty behavior. Maybe that's how it's actually playing out. Who was phone? Question mark, question mark. Y'all are so lucky I don't get to know who it is that posted any of these. Best April Fool's story. Either that you did, or was done to you, or you saw. That is not possible. None of them are good. They cannot be good. They are just objectively prohibited from being of quality. That's probably not true, but it's hard to imagine that they actually function. I don't actually have one. I think we've talked about pranks before. I hate them. But this is why I'm kind of iffy on it, realistically. I don't remember, and the reason why I can't give you a really good answer. I had a conversation with somebody not too long ago where I was like, pranks are always terrible. There's no way that they could be good. And they're like, well, what if the prank was like this? And I was like, okay, you know what? That actually doesn't sound that bad. But it's just not how much, a wholesome prank, that totally works. I've been so lambasted by just terrible pranks my whole life, potentially. It's only probably happened a few times, but they stick in my brain, in my soul. It's like a scar, a little spot that I can't wipe off no matter how hard I try. And so it's the first things that come into my mind are these terrible experiences with pranks. And April Fool's jokes, everybody's like, oh, we did here on Twitter. I burned my own house down. Haha, got him, just kidding. And everybody's like, what is happening? No, what if you didn't have us fear for your safety? Would that be? I don't. My brain just goes to a naughty place when it comes to pranks. So my answer is this whole long monologue now. What is your favorite type of wilderness? I want to say like unspoilt wilderness. Let's go to philosophy. There's this idea that was presented to me when I was getting my degree that if there is human engagement in any form or fashion, a natural setting or scene or place that is kind of defies conception is inherently destroyed as wilderness, as having wildness. Because even the perception of viewing wilderness, stepping into it for the first time, changes the nature. The essence of the thing, because we're talking about nature, right? And then the nature of the nature. Anyway, the essence of the thing, and applies some element of artifice by virtue of human engagement at all. Seeing wildness makes it not wild. And it's kind of weird. Of course, there's, a whole long, in-depth, thousands of papers and books on the subject. Lots of discourse. Whether or not it's correct or incorrect, the exploration of it is really interesting. But I think my favorite kind of wilderness is the fantasy kind. The kind that I can't step into and still have it be wilderness. The thing that loses its wildness by me doing anything with it, walking in it, camping, hiking, looking at it. And then even there's the more extreme idea of you destroyed the wilderness by just thinking about it. And it's like, okay, calm down, hold on, we're a little too far here. There's this fantastical fantasy of the unspoiled wilderness. The animals just, they don't even necessarily care that you're there. They're like, oh, look, that's interesting. Let me just go about my business, you know, burying this nut or mauling that other animal. But I think there's this like romanticization that I have. I have no idea why that's where my head went. Romanticization that I have of that being a part of nature that I have never seen, and maybe doesn't exist, never existed, can't exist, because it's a fantasy by itself, and because as soon as I get in there and start applying all of my, you know, thought and analysis, and not necessarily like it suddenly becomes spoiled because I put a footprint there, and that's not, because I'm also just like an organism, just doing organism stuff. But the separation from natural to unnatural is through artifice. And artifice by its nature is the human imposed thing. It's the way something changes by virtue of our engagement with it. And then you're following through with this idea of anything that you engage with becomes artificial to some extent, conceptually becomes artificial. And wilderness and wildness is a concept, not a reality, which is fascinating. It's not a real thing. And there's a lot of reasons why if I heard somebody say that out of context, I'd be like, what are you talking about? You're an idiot. Anyway, let me see if I can give you a real answer without getting too poetic and weird. I'm not sure that's possible. Frankly, you're probably paying for the waxing poetic and weirdness, the eccentricities, the completely non-answer answers. But I really like wood stuff. I love forests. You know, I stepped out on my patio balcony thing today. I walked out into the open air this morning when I woke up, and I could just smell trees. I mean, it may not have been trees at all, but like that's what pops up in my head. I could smell, you know, green. I could smell the presentation of nature. And it's one of the great joys of living in Seattle. You know, I mean, walking down the street, you'll go from, you know, smelling the joys of nature to smelling the joys of urine or arid feces, and just kind of trades back and forth. It just can go either way. But there's something about the scent of the forest floor, the earth that is doing earth stuff, the fungus that's eating the dead things, and the bacteria breaking down, you know, 3 years of leaves piled up on the forest floor, and just the scent that comes from all of this stuff and changes, you know, based on how long ago it rained and what the current temperature is and what the temperature fluctuation is between day and night and how much sun there is, and all of that shift that happens when you're in it and staying in it, and you're not just a visitor for like a 4-hour hike, but you're staying out there for a long while. You get to feel this change that's more than just palpable. Like you almost get to feel like you're becoming it, like you are part of this whole, you know, meta organism, which it isn't really, but that's sort of the feeling that you get. And so there's just something to me that's just magical about dense forest, you know, like the dark canopy, the change of light as it's filtered through, you know, layer after layer of massive trees, and just all the smells, and it's just so enveloping. All right, that was one question. We got you have to choose one species to get rid of completely. What is it? No. No. There are invasive species to certain regions that aren't invasive to their, you know, native area, that totally work within a particular environment and ecosystem and are relatively well balanced for that. But then you take it out of that and you put it somewhere else, and it's like, yo, this is a dream come true. I'm thriving. Let me kill everything else so that I can just be the boss. So I wouldn't get rid of anything completely, because those things are perfectly fine in their you know, in their home base, in their native habitat. But I would certainly love to see where any and all, frankly, all of those kinds of things, whether invasive species get removed from an area completely, because it's way better to have that be the thing that's going on. Way better. Like, I don't know, what is it, like zebra mussels in like the Great Lakes or something? When I was living in Indiana, there was some kind of an invasive tree that people would go out, cut down, and they had like a special kind of planticide. I think that's just called an herbicide. Planticide that they would like paint onto the cut down tree trunk stump, because cutting it down also didn't kill it. It would just grow right back and like 3 times bigger every time you cut it down. It was some kind of a brutal, savage kind of a plant for which you need the planticide. And it's things like that that I would love to see get removed from regions. It came in from, I don't know, I think it's like from somewhere in India, which is an incredibly large place. It doesn't really narrow it down. But I think it was from somewhere in India that had been brought over because it was like a really pretty tree that people put in pots and would put on their, you know, out in their garden or whatever. And then it started going like, oh, I'm thriving. This is so good. Let me go out and expand my horizons. And then we ended up with a problem. And that happens all the time. There's all kinds of beetles and, you know, plants and fungi, bacteria and stuff, the viruses that are showing up, which I don't think is any surprise to anybody. You know, these things that become invasive when they shift environments from something where they're totally working fine to where they explode in population and start wreaking havoc. But final point I want to make on that one is really that I believe without exception, and I know that people's like, you know, nihilistic kind of answer would be like, humans, get rid of humans. Everything can have its place and should, and realistically does. But when things are allowed to get out of control, or not even necessarily like allowed to, like there has to be some element of top-down control, like, oh, we humans are the masters of the planet and we get to decide what things belong where. When there's a tip in balance, that's when things become a problem. We have that in a massive way. But this can also happen with any number of things. You know, the environment changes a little bit, they get to expand their horizons a little bit, they go a little bit further out, and then find this new territory that they just dominate the landscape. They sacrifice everything else for them to be able to grow. And it's not a knowing, willing kind of a thing, like, oh, I can't wait to beat up these other trees with my tree babies. It doesn't work like that. They're just living their life. They're just like, this is a very comfortable place to be. I wish to be many more of me here. It's the nature of life. Can you go into a haunted house? I believe I have gone into probably many haunted houses. I want to say every house is haunted in some form or fashion. But I mean, you know, I get scared of all kinds of stuff for just absolutely no reason. I have anxiety. It doesn't give a goddamn if it's a slightly dirty fork or going in to give a presentation in front of people who totally respect me, or a totally haunted house with a poltergeist that wants to set my hair on fire. It doesn't, my brain just does what it wants. It fears what it wants to fear. But you know, a house doesn't even have to be haunted. If it's just like, there's a very dark hallway and I feel particularly vulnerable and then a noise happens, I'm like, nope, let me GTFO out of here. I think the O is the out, but you are suddenly locked inside a pitch black room. What do you do? Cry a lot? This is a not exciting answer. I mean, you know, there seems like there's like that whole reasonable setup for how you'd approach these. You want to feel your way around stuff and see what you're getting into. Is it a pitch black box that has razor blades on the side? Like, that sounds terrifying. I watched that movie once, never again. You know, is it just like, well, I accidentally slipped and fell into a closet and knocked over the lamp while I was on my way in there? It's like, oh, that's an easy fix. Let me just walk out the door, find the, just whoop, slide it open, boom, I'm done. But I do safely assume that screaming and crying is going to be part of this process. Really, not even has to do with like being locked in a pitch black room. It's just like that. What is it, a Tuesday? Yeah, it sounds like a time to cry. You notice a wallet on the side of the road. What do you do? Depends on how fast I'm driving. This sounds like a driving thing. This sounds like I noticed it on the side of the road, not because I was walking there, but because I was driving and I was like, oh, there's a wallet. If I'm going over 20, I'm not stopping. I don't care if it was fully fat stacked worth of cash and literally said on it, whoever finds this, you're welcome to keep whatever's inside. I'm like, no, it's a lot of effort to just stop. So we'll just, bye wallet, bye. You know, I'm definitely the kind of person though who wants to return it to the rightful owners without thieving anything out of it. So presumably there's checking for ID. I wouldn't necessarily want to mail it back to the ID address, but try and find the person and give them a call. Is there, you know, phone number listed somewhere on there? A lot of people keep that kind of stuff in their wallets so that they can have a lost and found moment. But the reason is that, you know, like a lot of people have outdated IDs. They've moved but didn't change address. And I don't want to just like mail somebody's wallet where it becomes impossible for them to get it back. They don't know that I mailed it out somewhere. We're not in contact with each other. I mailed it out to the address that they're no longer at. And somebody else ends up with it. And who knows what they're going to do. I know what they're going to do. And I don't want it. So yes, return. It's a return thing. And it's not a return thing because I'm here talking to people. And I'm like, well, I want to present myself as a good person. When I was a kid, I would totally steal some money out of that goddamn wallet. And be like, well, I don't know. Somebody else must have found it first and take the money. Well, I was being the kind citizen that I am, returned it to you ultimately. But I didn't take, no, not me. I've lost my wallet before. It sucks. You got so much work you have to do just to replace things, get cards canceled and whatever. I'd want to, as quickly as possible, help alleviate some of that. You know what I mean? Anyway, grab any digit on your left hand with your right hand. Which digit did you grab? This looks like my ring finger. I thought about some fingers and I was like, let's go for the one that I might grab the least. What? Who asked this question? That is such a specific and curious, but also irrelevant. I have so much respect for that question. I don't know why. The road forks to the right and left. You are told there is a treasure on the right side. What do you do? Well, I didn't bring on my journey rain gear, so I'm not going to be able to go underneath the waterfall to get the treasure that is obviously locked in and hidden behind the waterfall. If that's the situation I'm running up against, that's going to fill me with so much anxiety. I'm probably going to turn around and walk back down the path. Not pick which one. What this suddenly becomes a test of my intellect. You know, like the Princess Bride, where it's like, one of these mugs is poisoned. One of these goblets is poisoned. And you, clearly knowing that I am a man of intellect, would poison your own mug, thinking that I am going to invert the assumptions of a normal thinker. But you also, knowing that I'm a man of intellect, would assume that I would make this inversion of assumptions. Thus, this is the one that is poisoned. However, you, being a man also of clear intellect, and it just goes back and forth forever. That's how my brain would set it up, is like, wait, somebody's telling me there's treasure in one direction? That sounds like a bandito. That sounds like somebody who wants to cause me to go in the direction of treasure. But maybe there's actually treasure there, but something to defeat to get the treasure. And somebody's really setting it up so that I do the distraction of the thing that needs to be defeated while they get the treasure, because clearly there was a person who wrote this down and intends for you to go in the one direction. Or do they assume that you know that it's a trap, and therefore they've set up their trap on the road that doesn't have the treasure? And it goes back and forth forever. I don't want to deal with none of that. I have a hard enough time making decisions what socks to put on in the morning. I'm going back down the path. One game to delete from existence. Extinction excluded. Why? Because Extinction's already been deleted? Double Dragon. Double Dragon. Oh, God, I hated that game when I was a kid. Oh, it's terrible. That is one of the reasons why I probably have some kind of a scarring about not playing retro games, is Double Dragon. Oh, God, it was miserable. However, Altered Beast is super cool. If you could, would you? Interpret as you will. I might. Depends on how bad my anxiety is that day and whether or not it aligns with my, my values. And then I'm trying to build a lot of whimsy and play into 2021. I'm not doing a very good job at it, but I am getting better. And play kind of moves. I was actually journaling about this morning for my morning pages. Play kind of moves you out of systems and systematized approaches and process are very efficient, and they can be effective within a very limited framework. But part of that limitation is that you've removed some opportunity for creativity by restricting freedom. Restricting freedom for the sake of creativity can be very productive and valuable, but if all you do is work within your own self-imposed systems, can really get in the way of creativity and like just letting loose the soul. So, maybe. Depends on how that whimsy comes into play and how inside my own head I get. You know what I mean? How much wood can a HunterWild chuck? Oh, I don't know. I got some shoulder injuries. I've been talking about that every time I talk about fitness. I got some shoulder injuries, so I think they're nice and healed, but I haven't tried working out since then. So really, it's just until my shoulder just gives out. I have reverted back to having nerd noodles. So are they like little sticks I can throw? I can chuck an axe. That's something I could definitely do. Sometimes I play around like I'm god tier with axe throwing. I'm not god tier, but I do seem to be just randomly really good at it. Like, for somebody who had never thrown an axe, I've tried to throw like knives as a kid. I probably tried to throw I did try and throw some hatchets as a kid, but I had no idea how to get it to work. I was like, people do this in the movies all the time, and they're just like, boop, and then it lands in somebody's back or in somebody's eye or whatever. And I'm like, how are y'all doing any of this stuff? I could not get it to work. But then as an adult, kind of more recently, there's axe throwing, like places. And I went out there and I was like, oh, I can't really figure out how to do this. Not so much. Had a little, had an instructor who was like, oh, try this thing and try this thing. And it did not take me very long to go like, boom, like nailing bullseyes. Sometimes it still just like goes off in some random direction and, cuts off some other dude's toe. But I get them like really good, and I can make some good adjustments, throwing 2 axes at once. And I recently bought some throwing knives too, which I'm really excited to try out. What was the question? Why do I sound drunk? How much wood can a HunterWild chuck? There is sometimes wood on the handles of the axes, so if you could experience one thing for the first time again, what would it be? Existence? That sounds terrifying. Maybe my kind of terrifying. Certain foods. I don't know what specific foods, but I feel like the realm of food is like trying something for the first time isn't a sacrifice. Trying something again for the first time isn't a sacrifice. It's always a refreshed delight. Whereas when I've answered this question before, it's like, my favorite, video game or books or films or whatever. When I go through them a second or third or 18th time, I get something new out of it. And I don't necessarily feel the same way that a lot of other people do when they're like, oh, I wish I could, read my favorite book series again for the first time, or watch my favorite movie again for the first time because of the wonder and majesty that I felt doing it the first time. I also feel the wonder and majesty, but it's not necessarily lost the second time I do it. It doesn't feel the same, but there's new stuff that also comes in. But food, I think, is equally delicious, the 80th time you've tried it, and the first time you also get the same amount of deliciousness, but with that ooh kind of factor of like, I didn't know this was such a thing. Sweet or sour? Yes. Yes. We're talking soup? Absolutely. Sweet and sour soup? Hot and sour soup? Yeah, sweet and sour sauces. I love candies that are sweet and sour. Give me the sour stuff, give me the sweet stuff. I like them both. I like them mixed in together. Yes. Okay, that's the very last question, and thank God, because I am hungry. I don't think I've eaten yet today, and I have the hungers. that I will feast maybe on something for the first time again. Can you have self-imposed like food amnesia? Thanks for being patrons. Thanks for fueling all of the good stuff that I get to craft and put out into the world, and also mitigating, financial security anxieties, because we all know that that is a killer, and it shouldn't be, but I get to make dope stuff for dope people and feel a little more secure in doing it, thanks to you. We get to breathe badass stuff into the world. Oh, it's so good. I don't know. This was an unscripted, potentially horrifying outro, but I love you, and I'm grateful for you, and I hope you enjoyed the answers on the Q&A, on this Patreon Q&A for, what month is it? September? April. Yes.